After my parents got divorced, I was a baby, I was about 6 months old, I was sent to live with my maternal grandparents in the little town of Defiance, Ohio. My grandparents actually immigrated to Defiance in the early 1950s. They came from Sweden, and I realized that the prior decade was very difficult for all Europeans, even those who lived in European countries. You know, for the rest of her life, if my grandmother ever met somebody with a remotely German-sounding name, like Smith, she'd have to pull one of us aside and ask,
"Is that Smith or Von Schmidt? Are you sure he's not a Nazi?"
I had even heard these wonderful stories about my grandparents hiding Jews in their attic. Just wasn't sure if that was before or after they moved to Ohio. Oh, my confusion's justified. My childhood memories of Defiance, Ohio were wonderful. They were romantic. I want you to imagine Mayberry. It's quiet. Everybody knew everybody, and the kids could play safely in the street. Now, on our street, we had neighbors that were like the Nelsons and the Cleavers, the ideal that television presented to America. I also was a little out of place in Defiance, Ohio. I was the only kid on the street who lived with his grandparents. Back then, you couldn't even say divorce out loud. We were also the only multilingual family there, and we got these strange looks from paranoid neighbors, always thinking that we were talking about them. Well, we were, but... I would later leave Defiance when I was about 7, but that little town always kept popping up in the national news. Like the time when the Ku Klux Klan had a recruiting rally on the courthouse steps in downtown Defiance. Now, to the credit of a lot of the townspeople, they rallied themselves together and ran the Klan out of town. And then, of course, there was that runaway train that came through Defiance, and the police decided to shoot out the tires. But my favorite story was Christmas morning. At the end of Christmas services in this church, Santa Claus appears at the door. 4 parishioners freak out, grab poor Santa and throw him onto the sidewalk. Santa had to spend Christmas in traction. Because some people in Defiance take their religion very seriously. Well, the best restaurant in Defiance, Ohio is the Defiance Hospital cafeteria. It's been written up in all the local papers. You know, my grandparents, I never heard them ever refer to Defiance Hospital as a place where you can go for quality health care, but it's nice to know that their cafeteria gets 5 stars from the Toledo Blade food critic. I myopically saw the entire state of Ohio the same way I saw the little town of Defiance. Nothing but John Deere caps, gun racks, and really long conversations about bait and tackle. Well, that was until I fell in love with a girl from Cincinnati. Now, Mark Twain once said, "When the end of the world comes, I want to be Cincinnati, because things always happen there 20 years later." I didn't know much about Cincinnati except for it was the home to Cincinnati Reds owner Marge Schott. Her racist views reminded me of the Ohio I knew. Cincinnati was the home to talk show host Jerry Springer. People on his show reminded me of the Ohio I knew. Cincinnati was also the home to the fictional radio station WKRP. My favorite episode, the one where the shopping mall gets bombed with live turkeys. This sounds like something that could really happen in the Ohio I knew. Now, my first time in Cincinnati was Christmas 1993. This was our first Christmas as husband and wife. Now, we get there, and Donna's mother is taking me around on an architectural tour. She showed me some houses that were so incredible. Some of them were actually linked to the Underground Railroad. This was not the Ohio I knew. And then Donna's father introduced me to some of Cincinnati's local artists. These are people whose work have been seen in museums and galleries all over the world. this was not the Ohio I knew. And then Donna herself took me to museums and galleries. And of course it's Donna, so she took me to shopping malls. She also introduced me to something I really fell in love with. It's called Cincinnati chili. They put chili on spaghetti. It's good, yeah. This was not the Ohio I knew. The only negative on our trip actually started taking place before we even got there. The thing was happening at Fountain Square. Now, if you're a WKRP fan, you see Fountain Square in the opening of every episode with a big green fountain. Well, you see, this year, the City Council had decided that the holiday decorations for Fountain Square were not going to have any religious themes. No nativity, no menorah, just one big winter wonderland. And everybody was okay with that except one group, the Klan. Angered over the absence of God, the KKK petitioned a federal judge to have a cross displayed on Fountain Square. I thought the cross was more of an Easter thing, but I digress. Now the judge ruled that the Klan had as much right as anybody else to apply for a permit for a Fountain Square display. The very first cross that they put up was knocked down in the middle of the night by some well-intentioned vandals. I like to present the pro-vandalism side. But a brand new cross was put up the next day. And this cross was the topic of conversation everywhere we went. I had to see this thing. Now, as a Cincinnati girl, Donna was embarrassed for her hometown. As an African-American...
I wanted nothing to do with it!
Thanks, dear. But after some persistence and reminding Donna that Fountain Square's across the street from a major shopping mall, we went to Fountain Square. We arrived at the square, and off to the side we saw two 2x4s just kind of nailed together. And then the whole thing was painted with this white house paint. Somebody had handwritten scriptures on it with a blue ballpoint pen. And then that was anchored with 4 5-gallon buckets filled with cement. First impression, this is a horrible way to honor a man who made his living as a carpenter. Now, to protect the brand new cross, you had about half a dozen Klansmen circling it. What really shows off the cowardliness of the KKK is that these weren't even Cincinnati Klansmen. To protect their anonymity, they bussed in Klansmen from nearby Indiana. He's from Indiana. It's like the Klan was outsourcing before anybody else. And then, to protect the freelance Klansmen, you had about a dozen Cincinnati police officers circling them. The police were encircled by a bunch of praying nuns. They were all holding this silent protest. So I took Donna about as close as a cross as I was able to get. And in full view of the Klansmen, I kissed her. I thought it was a classier gesture than giving them the finger. But really, even if I did, what were they going to do to me? I was protected by the police and the nuns. This was the Ohio I knew.